They didn't just trespass, they erased the one thing keeping me alive out there. Came home from work, turned on the faucet, and nothing. No sputter, no warning, just silence, like the land itself had given up on me. And by the time I walked out back and saw what they'd done, I realized something real fast. This wasn't a mistake. This was someone deciding my life didn't matter. I live about 40 minutes outside of Ridge Hollow, out where the pavement ends and the desert starts pushing back. 7 acres of stubborn, dusty land that most folks would call useless, but to me, it's everything. I bought it cheap 15 years ago from an old rancher named Walter Briggs. Guy had hands like leather and a voice that sounded like gravel in a tin can. He drilled that well himself back in the early 80s, told me once over a warm beer, "Son, you take care of that well, it'll take care of you." I didn't realize how literal that was until the day it stopped working. Out there, you don't get city water, no pipes running under the road, no backup system, just that one well. It feeds the house, keeps the small patch of tomatoes and peppers alive, gives my dog something to drink, and honestly, it's the difference between living and packing up for good. You lose that, you don't just call a plumber. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars, permits, drilling crews, and weeks without water in a place where summer hits like a hammer. For years, it was quiet. Peaceful even. Just wind, heat, and the occasional coyote reminding you you're not at the top of the food chain. Then about a year ago, everything changed. Big signs went up along the dirt road, Sunspire Estates, luxury desert living, modern homes with panoramic views, that kind of thing. The kind of project that doesn't belong out there, but money has a way of rewriting what belongs. They rolled in fast, bulldozers, grading crews, trucks that never stopped moving. Dust clouds hung in the air from sunrise to sunset. And with them came people who walked like they already owned everything they could see. That's when I met Darren Cole. He showed up one afternoon while I was fixing a fence post, leaning against his truck like he had all the time in the world. Clean boots, pressed shirt, sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. He didn't introduce himself right away, just watched me for a bit, then said, "You the owner here?" I nodded, wiped my hands on my jeans. Been that way for a while. He gave a half smile, like he found that amusing. "I'm managing the Sunspire project next door. Figured I should get familiar with the neighbors." Neighbor, funny word for someone about to turn a quiet stretch of desert into a construction zone. We walked the fence line together, him asking questions like he was filling out a checklist, property boundaries, how long I'd been there, whether I had any issues with the previous owner. Then his eyes landed on the well cap, just a few yards off the house. "That your water source?" he asked, casual as could be. "Only one I've got," I said. He nodded slowly, crouched down to look at it, tapping the metal cap with his knuckle. "Old setup. Still works." He stood up, brushed imaginary dust off his hands. Good to know. Something about the way he said that stuck with me, like he'd just learned something useful, not just made conversation. After that, I started noticing little things. Survey flags creeping closer to my fence than they should have been. Workers cutting across my land like it was a shortcut. One morning, I found tire tracks about 10 feet past my boundary line. Nothing huge, nothing you could easily turn into a legal issue, just enough to make you feel like someone was testing how much you tolerate. I mentioned it to Darren a couple weeks later when I caught him on site. He barely looked up from his clipboard. "Probably just a subcontractor getting turned around," he said. "We've got a lot of moving parts out here." "Yeah," I replied. "Just make sure those parts stay on your side of the fence." He gave me that same half smile again. Of course. But it didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Louder, closer, more entitled. Like the longer they were there, the more invisible my property became to them. Still, I didn't push it. I've lived long enough to know picking fights with big developers usually ends one way. You lose time, money, and sleep. So I kept my head down, stayed on my side, and hoped they'd finish up and move on. Then came the day everything went quiet. I'd been working a double shift in town. Came home later than usual, sun already dipping low. The first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. No engines, no shouting, no machines. Just wind. Didn't think much of it at first. Figured maybe they'd wrapped early. I walked inside, dropped my keys, turned on the kitchen faucet, and nothing came out. Not even a cough of air. I stood there for a second, staring at it like that might fix something, then tried the bathroom sink. Same thing. That's when the feeling hit. Not panic exactly, More like a slow, heavy realization pressing down on your chest. I stepped outside, boots crunching on dry dirt, and started toward the well. Even from a distance, something looked off. The cap was gone, and as I got closer, I saw it. Gray, smooth, solid. The entire casing, filled to the top with concrete. Still wet enough to shine under the fading sunlight, like it had just happened. I stopped dead in my tracks, just staring at it, trying to make sense of something that didn't make any sense at all. Then I heard it, a low engine rumble behind me. Turned around and saw a cement truck parked just inside my fence line. Like it belonged there. That's when the anger hit. Not fast, not explosive, just this steady burn rising up from somewhere deep, the kind that tells you this isn't just a problem. It's a line that's been crossed. I walked straight toward the truck, the driver sitting there like he was waiting for instructions. "Who told you to pour that?" I asked, pointing back at the well. He barely glanced at me. "Supervisor said it was an abandoned well. Needed sealing." I let that sit for a second, then said, real slow, "Does that look abandoned to you?" He shrugged. "I just do the job I'm told, man." "Yeah, I figured." So I pulled out my phone. And I called Darren. He picked up on the third ring, sounding annoyed, like I'd interrupted dinner. "Yeah, you just filled my well with concrete," I said. There was a pause, not surprise, not confusion, just a pause. Then he goes, "Yeah, that was flagged during site prep. It falls within our setback zone." I blinked. "It's on my land." Another pause. "You'll have to drill a new one," he said, like he was telling me to replace a broken fence post. And that's when something inside me just clicked. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, just said, "All right," and hung up. Because at that moment, I realized something Darren clearly hadn't. He thought this was over, but it hadn't even started yet. I stood there for a while after that call, phone still in my hand, staring at that solid column of concrete like it might somehow undo itself if I gave it enough time. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't some careless mistake. This was a decision, made by someone who figured I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. And maybe, in their world, most people wouldn't. But they didn't know where I came from, or how long I'd spent building a life out here one stubborn piece at a time. So I got to work. First thing I did was document everything. Slow, steady, thorough. I walked circles around that well with my phone, recording from every angle, zooming in on the fresh concrete, the missing cap, the slurry that had spilled over onto the dirt. I made sure to catch the truck, the license plate, the company logo on the side. Then I walked the fence line, showing exactly where their tire tracks crossed onto my property. No rush, no emotion, just facts. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I already knew this wasn't going to be settled with a conversation. When I was done, I got in my truck and drove straight into town. Now, I don't trust lawyers easily, but there's one exception, and her name's Evelyn Price. I'd met her years back during a property tax dispute. Sharp mind, no nonsense. The kind of person who listens more than she talks, and when she does talk, you pay attention. Her office sits on the corner of Main and Alder. Nothing fancy, just a small brick building with blinds that never seemed to open all the way. I walked in, still dusty, still carrying that quiet anger, and her receptionist gave me that look like something serious just walked through the door. Evelyn saw me within 10 minutes. She didn't ask how I was doing, just said, "What happened?" So I handed her my phone. She watched the video once. No interruptions, no reaction, just leaned back slightly when it finished. Then she said, real calm, "They sealed your well." "Filled it to the top," I replied. She nodded once. "That's not a civil issue. That's a violation of state water protection law, and possibly criminal." That word hung in the air for a second. Criminal. Not negligence. Not a mistake. Criminal. And suddenly, the whole situation shifted. She turned to her computer, already pulling up records. "Do you have your original well permit?" "Should be on file with the county," I said. "Drilled back in '82. She gave a small smile. "Good. That makes this easier." What followed was, honestly, kind of impressive to watch. She moved fast, but not rushed, like someone who's done this enough times to know exactly where to go and what to pull. Water rights documentation, drilling permits, electrical permits tied to the pump, land surveys showing exact boundaries. Piece by piece, she built a picture that made one thing very clear. That well wasn't just mine. It was legally protected. And what they did, it wasn't just wrong, it was enforceable. At one point she paused, looked at me over her glasses, and said, "Did you give them permission to touch it?" I almost laughed. "They didn't even ask." "Good," she said. "Because if they had, and you'd said yes, this would be a very different conversation." Then she picked up her phone. Didn't hesitate, didn't warn anyone, just dialed. "County Water Authority," she said when someone picked up. "This is Evelyn Price. I need an inspector dispatched immediately for an unlawful well sealing on active residential property." She listened for a moment, then added, "Yes, I have video documentation. And yes, the well is permitted." Pause. "Good. I'll expect someone within the hour." She hung up and looked at me. "Go home. Stay there. And don't touch anything." "What happens now?" I asked. She leaned back slightly. "Now we let them explain it to the county." I drove back out as the sun started dropping behind the hills, the sky turning that deep orange that makes everything look calmer than it actually is. But inside, I could feel something building. Not anger anymore, something sharper. Certainty. By the time I pulled onto my dirt road, I saw them. 2 white county trucks parked near my fence line. And a third vehicle I recognized immediately. Darren's. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward the well, where 3 inspectors were already gathered, clipboards in hand, taking photos, measuring, talking quietly among themselves. One of them nodded at me. "You the property owner?" "That's right." He gestured toward the well. "You reported this?" "My attorney did." He crouched down near the casing, running a tool along the edge of the concrete, checking depth, consistency. Another inspector was already reviewing documents on a tablet. Then Darren turned and saw me. And I swear, the look on his face shifted in real time. Earlier, over the phone, he sounded annoyed, confident, like this was just another small problem he could brush aside. But now there was something else there. Concern. He walked over, fast, voice tight. "You called the county?" I shrugged. Figured they'd want to know. He lowered his voice, stepping closer. "You could have just talked to me." "I did," I said. "You told me to drill another well." His jaw tightened. This is getting blown out of proportion. Behind him, one of the inspectors stood up and said, loud enough for both of us to hear, "This well is active. Fully permitted." Another added, "Concrete's still curing. This happened today." Darren turned slightly, trying to keep his composure. "Look, this was probably a subcontractor misunderstanding." The first inspector cut him off. "Who holds the site permit?" Darren hesitated, just for a second. "We do." "Then you're responsible." That landed. Hard. You could feel the air shift again. But this time, it wasn't in his favor. They spent the next 30 minutes documenting everything. Photos, measurements, cross-checking permits, verifying boundaries against county records. At one point, one of them asked me to confirm that I hadn't abandoned the well. I pointed at the electrical line still running to it, the pressure tank by the house. "Does that look abandoned?" He didn't even bother answering. Finally, the lead inspector stood up, dusted off his hands, and said, "We're issuing an immediate stop work order on the adjacent project." Darren blinked. "You can't shut down the entire site over this." The inspector met his gaze evenly. "Watch me." And just like that, everything changed. Within minutes, red tags started going up. Equipment was flagged. Radios crackled across the site. Trucks that had just arrived were turned around at the entrance. Workers stood around, confused, some annoyed, some just watching like they knew something big had just happened. Darren pulled out his phone, already making calls, voice low but urgent. I caught fragments. Legal, temporary, we'll fix it, but it all sounded smaller now. Because for the first time since they showed up, he wasn't in control. I stood there off to the side, arms crossed, not saying a word. Didn't need to. One of the inspectors walked over to me before leaving. "You'll be contacted with next steps," he said. "But based on what we've seen, they're going to have to make this right." "How right?" I asked. He gave a slight smile. "Let's just say, a lot more expensive than leaving your well alone." And as those county trucks pulled away, leaving dust trails behind them, I looked back at that concrete-filled hole in the ground. And for the first time since I got home that evening, I felt something close to relief. Because Darren thought this was just another piece of land he could push around. But out here, land pushes back. The next morning felt different. Same land, same dry wind rolling across the property, same long stretch of nothing in every direction. But something had shifted underneath it all, like the ground had finally decided to stop giving way and start holding its line. I woke up early, out of habit more than anything, walked into the kitchen and instinctively turned the faucet again. Still nothing, just that hollow click of empty pipes. And for a second it hit me all over again. How fragile everything out here really is. How one decision, made by the wrong person on the wrong day, can strip you down to survival real quick. But this time, I didn't feel helpless. Around mid-morning, my phone started ringing. First it was Evelyn. "They're scrambling," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "Corporate's involved now. They didn't expect the county to move that fast. Guess they're not used to people pushing back," I said. There was a slight pause, then a hint of a smile in her voice. "They're used to people settling." That stuck with me. Because she was right. Most people probably would have taken that hit. Maybe argued a little, maybe tried to negotiate, but eventually folded under the pressure of time, cost, and exhaustion. Drill a new well, move on, chalk it up as bad luck. But this wasn't bad luck. This was someone looking at my life and deciding it was disposable. And I wasn't about to validate that. By noon, I saw more vehicles pulling into the construction site than I had in weeks, but not the usual crews. These were clean trucks, company logos polished, people in pressed shirts instead of dust-covered vests. Decision makers, the kind that only show up when money's bleeding. I stayed where I was, leaning against my fence, arms folded, watching it all unfold from a distance. Didn't need to be in the middle of it. The message had already landed. A couple hours later, Darren came walking over. He looked different. Same clothes, same posture, but whatever confidence he had before, it was cracked now, like something underneath had shifted and he was still trying to adjust to the new weight of it. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, just let the silence sit there a second longer than comfortable, then nodded once. He stopped a few feet from the fence, like he suddenly remembered boundaries existed. "Look," he started, running a hand through his hair. "This got out of hand. It wasn't supposed to go like this." I tilted my head slightly. "No, the subcontractor misread the site plan," he said quickly. "They thought the well was inactive, inside our zone. It's on my land." I cut in, calm but firm. "I know that now," he snapped, then caught himself, lowering his voice. "I'm saying this wasn't intentional." That word again. Intentional. Funny how people lean on that when the outcome's already done. I looked past him, toward the frozen construction site, the red tags still hanging off equipment like warning signs nobody could ignore. "Doesn't really matter what you meant," I said. "Matters what you did." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that in all morning. "We're prepared to fix it." "Yeah," I replied. "You are." Another pause, heavier this time. Then he said, "We'll cover the cost of drilling a new well." I let out a quiet breath through my nose, almost a laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "That's not the offer," I said. He frowned. "What do you mean?" I stepped closer to the fence, just enough so he couldn't pretend this was still casual. "The county already told you what the offer is. You don't just drill a new well, you drill a better one. Deeper, fully permitted, inspected, and you cover every cost tied to it." His jaw tightened again. "That's excessive." "No," I said. "What's excessive is filling someone's only water source with concrete and expecting them to just deal with it." That landed. You could see it in his face. He didn't like being on this side of the conversation. But we weren't done. "Plus," I added, "you're covering temporary water delivery until it's done." His head snapped up slightly. "That wasn't." "It is now." We stood there for a moment, the desert wind moving between us, carrying dust and tension in equal measure. Finally, he nodded once. "I'll have to clear that." "Do that," I said. And just like that, the conversation ended. No yelling, no threats, just terms. Over the next few weeks, I watched something I'd never seen before. One of those big, untouchable development projects slow down, then stall, then start bending. Water trucks started showing up every other day, filling a temporary storage tank they installed near my house. Not ideal, but it kept things running, kept the garden alive, kept me from having to leave. Then came the drilling crew. Different from the construction guys, quieter, more focused, like they actually understood what they were dealing with. The foreman, older guy named Rick, walked the land with me before they started. "Heard what happened," he said, shaking his head. "That's a hell of a mistake." "Wasn't mine," I replied. He gave a small grin. "No, doesn't look like it was. They set up about 10 feet from the original well, after checking the aquifer lines and soil conditions. Took them days to get everything in place. Equipment humming early in the morning, drilling deep into ground that didn't give up anything easily. I spent a lot of that time just watching, not because I didn't trust them, but because after what happened, I needed to see it through with my own eyes. Needed to know that when this was done, it was really done. And then one afternoon, it happened. Rick waved me over, a rare smile breaking through his usual steady expression. "You're going to want to see this." I walked up as they powered up the pump for the first real test. There was a low rumble, a pause, and then water. Strong, clear, steady. Not a weak trickle like before. This was pressure, force, like the ground itself had decided to make a statement. Rick nodded toward it. "That's a good well. Better than what you had." I stood there for a second, just listening to it. That sound I didn't realize I'd missed so much. Relief doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet return of something you thought you'd lost. The paperwork came through a few days later. Final inspections passed. Permits updated. Costs, every single one, covered by Sunspire. And the project next door? Delayed for the rest of the season. Fines stacked on top of that. Word got around too. Small towns talk, even when they pretend they don't. People started asking questions about how a company like that could mess up so badly, how they didn't check something as basic as property lines and water rights. And for the first time since they showed up, they weren't the ones setting the narrative anymore. I saw Darren one last time before things wrapped up. He didn't come over, didn't try to talk, just stood near the edge of the site, looking out across the land like he was seeing it differently now. Maybe he was, maybe not. But here's the thing I kept thinking about after all of it was done. What if I hadn't pushed back? What if I'd just accepted it, taken the hit, drilled a new well on my own dime? Let them keep building like nothing happened. Would anything have changed? Or would that just become the cost of doing business for the next guy and the one after that? Because out here, or anywhere, really, there's always someone bigger, louder, with more money and more leverage. And the only reason they don't take everything they can is because sometimes someone decides to say no. So I'm curious, if you were in my position, standing there, looking at your only water source buried under concrete, would you have fought it? Or would you have walked away and started over? Let me know what you think, because I've seen both sides of that choice now, and I can tell you, only one of them changes anything.